speak in English. So thanks. In fact, I'm going to present not so usual point of view of on integrable systems. And I'm sorry, but usually it takes time to, I've tried to make this presentation many times. And I think that my way of looking at integrable system is very simple, but what is difficult is to make the link with the usual way. And somehow the longest part is to explain the usual way. So I will start by, first a very short introduction. So which is usually when you speak about, I'm going to talk about classical integrable systems. So usually you have what people would like to compute is a tau function. The tau function is a function of times, t0, t1, t2, and so on. It's an infinite dimensional vector. Let me call it t. So it's typically an infinite dimensional vector, and it should be solution. Saying that it's a tau function, that there is an integrable system, means that it should satisfy some equations, it should satisfy some properties, and typically you will have some Hirota equations, which is very closely related to Fay identities or to pre-Kerr relations. There are many ways of formulating that, but the important thing is that they are nonlinear equations. Well, let's say nonlinear, typically quadratic. Sorry, Hirota. There are other things you may want your tau function to satisfy. You may want to satisfy some Seiberg-Wheaton equations. And I will also speak about Miwa-Jimbo equations or Bertholin-Lagrange equations, which are, in fact, these are linear equations. I will say later what they are. And you may also want to satisfy some kind of Virasoro constraint, or let's say W algebra, which are also linear equations. In fact, you can have things that are solution of one but not the others, but the most interesting are the one that are solution to everything. So they are somehow some special tau functions. But this is the kind of thing you would like to consider. And very often, so let me give you an example of how one way of writing the Hirota equations or the Fay identities. One way is first you define psi of x. Well, it depends on time, of course, on the times. T is, I will write it this way, tau of t plus a certain vector x divided by tau of t, where x is the vector. So this bracket just means the notation for a vector with coordinate -1 over x, -1 over x squared, -1 over x cubed, and so on. So this is that vector. So it's an infinite vector. And psi satisfies, so this is called the wave function. And typically, Hirota equations, one way of writing them is saying that tau of t times tau of t plus, okay, let's take a minus b plus c minus d equals tau of t plus a minus b tau of t plus c minus d minus tau of t plus a minus d tau of t of plus c minus b. So this is more like the Fay identities. So this is typically indeed a quadratic equation for tau. It's not linear, and typically this is what you would like to satisfy. So, however, I would like to look at things from the point of view of t is just.
Sorry, it's a deep remark, dumb remark, but if A is B, C is D,
In fact, there are some, I did not write the definition, and there are singular limits when the points get close to each other. So it's just one way. Somehow, the definition of tau of this contains a denominator in A minus B and so on. So I didn't write the full definition, but I included the denominator in the definition. Otherwise, you would have factors outside. That's the usual way it's written, it's with factors. Multiplied by some rational function of A, B, C, D, but somehow I include them in the definition. It was just to spare some space on the blackboard. So, where is the eraser? So this is one thing you'd like to do. And the point of view I would like to present now is to say that we shall look at T as just local coordinates in a space. So somehow I would like to define tau not as a function of times, which are coordinates, but as function on a space. So somehow then I can make changes of coordinates. And so what I would like to define is tau of an object that I will call a spectral curve. And times are just ways of parametrizing spectral curves. There is not a unique way of choosing coordinates, but I would like to define the tau function intrinsically in terms of objects that are spectral curves. And typically, spectral curves are really like surfaces embedded into a space, and they can have they can have punctures. Somehow they can go to infinity in certain directions and things like that. So spectral curve is not just a surface, it's a surface together with its embedding and a little bit more structure. So we'll explain in a moment what is a spectral curve, but somehow times are just coordinates in the space of spectral curves. And we would like to define the tau function in terms of times in such a way that all these equations, Hirota, Seiberg-Witten, and all that, become very geometric, very natural in this language. And for instance, Hamiltonians have to do with deformations. So Hamiltonians, they have to do with deformation with respect to times. So the Hamiltonian flows are what happens when you flow in the space of when you flow the times. And so basically they are somehow tangent vectors. And again, I would like to express those tangent vectors intrinsically in terms of a geometry. And typically what I will show you is that a Hamiltonian Hamiltonians will be related to cycles. In fact, Hamiltonians in my language will be cycles. And the times and also the conserved quantities will be integrals of some forms over these cycles. So the times and the conserved quantities will be periods. So Hamiltonians will be cycles, and the times or the conserved quantities will be periods. So integrals of forms along cycles. And that's why they will automatically satisfy something like Picard-Fuchs equations or things like that. Also the Poisson structure will just be the intersection symplectic form on the space of cycles in this language. All the Poisson structure will be very simple. So let me now to move to a general picture of what I have in mind.
Question.
Sorry.
By
Yeah.
times you mean all these coordinates or what?
Sorry.
Like what do you mean by times?
In fact, what you mean by time, it's just, sorry, what you mean by d over dtk is one choice of tangent vector.
Right.
So if tk is a coordinate, so moving just tk is one choice of tangent vector, but then you can take linear combination of these, and any tangent vector is a linear combination of that. So in fact, indeed, when you write that, you have chosen coordinates. But in general, if you want to do it intrinsically, you just choose a tangent vector, whatever tangent vector you want. I will come back to that in a moment. So I just wanted to give the idea that what we want to do is to express the integrable systems in terms of geometry of the curve. And so now let me give another more general picture. So the general picture will work as follows. We'll have a space of spectral curve. Which I say for the moment a spectral curve. S, a spectral curve is, as I said, something like a curve embedded into a space with some structure. I'm not saying exactly what it is for the moment. I will say it later. But it's an element of this space. Okay, it's an element of this space. And the thing that I will use the topological recursion. Topological recursion, take it as a black box. It's something which you apply it to a spectral curve, and it gives you a sequence WGN for G positive, N positive. So it's a double sequence of things, and those things are N forms. They are differential forms, and so omega Gn is an N form on the surface. I will explain later what it is more precisely, but just take it as a black box. In fact, it's very automatic. You can just press the button on Mathematica to compute it. So if I give you a spectral curve, if you choose a spectral curve, you just press the button, you get the WGNs, which are computed by recursion. It's totally automatic. And just one thing is that for n equals 0, a 0 form is a scalar, so it's just a complex number. Omega G0 of your spectral curve, it's a scalar, so it's just a complex number, and it's customary to denote it Fg of S. It's just a scalar, and for every spectral curve, you can compute the sequence of such scalars.
It's a scalar function, or something.
It's a scalar function of the spectral curve, but for a given spectral curve, it's just a complex number. It can be 2, 3, or I don't know. And so you have a procedure that to every spectral curve associates this sequence. And
There's an N form on this S with the bar.
I will say more. Yes, it's a one form on this surface here. So for each spectral curve, you have a one form, a two form, and so on. A sequence of one forms, two forms, and so on. And now let me go to the other side, and let me define this quantity, tau of S. I leave some space here. Is so let's choose a number epsilon belong to C star, so a non-vanishing complex number. And let me define exponential of sum of G equals 0 to infinity of epsilon to the 2G minus 2 Fg of S. And to say that it depends on epsilon, let me write it this way. And this is a formal series. Let me call it perturbative. So somehow this is my candidate to be the tau function associated to my spectral curve. So you have a spectral curve, you compute its invariance by the topological recursion. You make this series, take the exponential, and call that, well, not exactly the tau function, but merely it's the perturbative part of the tau function. That's the definition. And the idea is that it will be the tau function in some sense. Well, first, typically for generic spectral curves, this grows like 2G factorial, those numbers. So typically this is a divergent series. So it does not really define a function. For every non-zero epsilon, the series is divergent. So it does not define a function. So if you want really to define a function from that, you can use resurgent techniques. So you do the Borel transform of that series, you Laplace transform the Borel transform, and you get back something. But basically, it's just to say that you should take into account all non-perturbative effects to redefine your function. So taking into account non-perturbative effects means that your full tau function will be more something like your perturbative tau function times 1 plus sum over k ck exponential minus epsilon to minus 1 ak. So that's your instantons. And times sum over j equals 0 to infinity epsilon j akj. Okay. There is a way to make that meaningful, but for the moment, so it's just to say that, so what I just want to point is that the perturbative tau function is not enough to redefine the tau function. You also need all the non-perturbative part. This is quite standard in resurgence and so on. And you have typically non-perturbative effects like exponential epsilon to the minus 1. It's exactly like in WKB, for instance. And you have those coefficients CKs. Well, what I said is that I will claim that this tau function will satisfy Hirota equations, Seiberg-Witten, Virasoro constraints, and all that. Well, first, Virasoro and Seiberg-Witten are linear equations. So somehow, whatever the CK you choose, so if you take integer, if you take linear combinations, you will still be solution of the linear equations. So somehow the fact that it's solution of Virasoro or Seiberg-Witten is independent of the value of CKs. But saying that it's solution of Hirota means that you should choose the CKs in a certain way for it to satisfy the nonlinear equations. So the value of the CKs is fixed by the Hirota equations, by the nonlinear equations. And typically,
what you mean is the right-hand side has no S dependence.
no, the AK depend on S and the AKG depend on S, and also somehow the CKs should depend on S to satisfy the Hirota equation. The idea is that the CKs will just be integers, in fact. And they will have to be related to intersection of cycles. So this is just how you construct the tau function from your spectral curve. Let me also, so let me mention what I call the wave function. So the wave function is, so in fact I will only write the perturbative part. It will be very similar to this definition, exponential sum of g positive and sum over n larger than 1, epsilon to the 2g minus 2 plus n over n factorial. And remember that omega gn is an n form, and I can integrate it n times from an origin. Okay, let me not say what origin I choose, but so it's something you can integrate n times. So this is meaningful. So each of these integrals is just basically a function of x. Each of those integers for a given x will just be a complex number, and you make this series, and this is psi. And what I claim is that there is an operator which annihilates psi. Well, let's write it this way. There is a certain operator that annihilates psi. This operator depends on the spectral curve, of course. And for the epsilon dependence, let me put an epsilon here, and let's say it's p epsilon like that. Okay. Let me write the epsilon dependence in this way.
How do you define T in terms of tau for when tau is defined by the spectral curve?
You mean here?
Yeah, that's a definition.
Yes, that's a definition. So you want how it is related to that one?
Yes.
I will say that later, but basically, indeed, it's something you add. So you remember in the introduction, the psi function was obtained from a shift of the times, and so you need to make a shift of the spectral curve. So you need to explain how you move in the space of spectral curves along a certain direction. So how you follow a tangent field in the spectral curve, in the space of spectral curves, and that's what I will explain later, that tangent fields are cycles. So that's the goal, and somehow you add to a spectral curve a cycle. So, but let me just claim for the moment that there is a certain operator that annihilates psi, and this operator is such that typically its coefficients are rational in X, are analytic in X. So it's not totally obvious that there is such an operator, but in fact the fact that there is such an operator is related to the integrability, to the integrable system. So it's not a triviality, but basically I claim that there is such an operator. Just ask to believe me. And the idea is that now if you take the limit when epsilon goes to 0 of your p epsilon of s and replace epsilon d over dx by just y, okay, let's call that this limit, p of xy. Okay, now it's typically it will be a polynomial in x and y, or rational function in x and y. So basically, this will be what we call the spectral curve. So let me explain how. So first, if you have such an operator annihilating psi, you can do the WKB approximation, and psi of x will typically start like exponential. So why did I introduce this limit? This limit, you introduce it because it tells you what is the limit of psi when epsilon goes to 0. It's not really a limit, it's more an asymptotic formula, but it's an integral of y of x prime dx prime, where y of x is the solution of p of x, y of x equals 0. So, so it's the characteristic equation of your differential system. So you have a differential system. The characteristic equation is typically, well, in many examples it will be a polynomial of x and y, or in general it's an analytic function of x and y. On solving the equation, you find that the leading term in the asymptotic of psi is just the exponential epsilon to the minus 1 times the integral of y. And there is a full sequence of corrections, a little bit like here. So the set of x and y such that p of xy equals 0. Okay, in the plane. So it's okay. Let's say it looks like that. Okay, in the plane xy. So this set is, in fact, what I will use as a spectral curve. So somehow this set will be my spectral curve. I need to give more details, but somehow now I have completed the loop. So if you start from a spectral curve, you will get a tau function. By taking the epsilon going to 0 limit, you can recover the spectral curve, and vice versa. Yes, I mean, so basically you can go both ways. So the spectral curve is, in some sense, the semi-classical limit of your integrable system. And using topological recursion from the semi-classical limit, you can reconstruct the full series, so the full integrable system, and vice versa. Okay. So now let me say something here. I plotted y as a function of x, but remember that x lives in C, it's two-dimensional. Y lives in C, it's two-dimensional, and the set of solution is in fact two-dimensional, it's a surface. Yeah.
Sorry, so you cannot have two different integrable systems with the same semi-classical limit?
You mean?
You can recover everything from the semi-classical limit.
Okay, I skipped some details. I skipped many details, and in fact it was hidden first in those coefficient C case. So basically, doing just the semi-classical limit is not enough. And in fact, I said that the spectral curve is a surface with some extra structure on it, and I did not yet describe the extra structure. So this is not really the spectral curve. This is just part of the data of the spectral curve, but there are extra data so basically several, you can have several classical limits which will in fact, the same semi-classical limit can correspond to several spectral curves. Because the spectral curve is not only that, it's that plus something else. Okay. But what I wanted to emphasize is that the spectral curve, so the y as a function of x, you should look at it as a complex function of a complex variable. And so in fact, it's a one-dimensional complex curve. So in terms of real, it's a two-dimensional real surface. So a spectral curve is really two-dimensional in terms of the reals. So that's part of the story. So how you go from spectral curves to integrable systems and back. In fact, I want to mention that there is another story. You can go from integrable, from spectral curves to string theory. So in fact, I will have other arrows that will go to CFT and to gauge theory. So the advantage of this formalism is that it automatically also associates to a spectral curve a string theory, a CFT, and a gauge theory. So the string, how do you get a string theory? In fact, it's just a property of topological recursion, which again, I did not say what is topological recursion. It's just a way to compute a sequence of numbers. But there is a very general theorem, which is that for every spectral curve, there exists a certain space. Let me call that S hat, which will be a space. It will be a space of surfaces. It will be a space of worldsheets. I don't want, sorry, it will be a target space for worldsheets. It will be a target space in which you can have worldsheets. I don't want to say exactly how you find it from the spectral curve, but the procedure is very simple. It's related to basically how many points. So the dimension of that space is related to how many points you have where the tangent is vertical, how many points where you have some self-crossings and all that. So basically, you can deduce your space just from the geometric data of your spectral curve. I don't want to say the details, but basically omega gn of your spectral curve is an integral over all worldsheets. And there exists a measure which I will call lambda s. In fact, it's more a cohomology class, but let me call it a measure. Worldsheets of genus G and n boundaries, and let me call that lambda s. So for every spectral curve, you have a kind of target space and measure, and it's very easy to compute. The measure is basically obtained from a Laplace transform in that spectral curve. I will not give a formula, and so somehow omega gns produced by topological recursions are correspond to worldsheets of a given genus and given number of boundaries, and the tau function would somehow correspond to the full, to the integral over the full space of worldsheets.
What is the dimension of this target space?
It depends on the number of branch points so you can have more or less every dimension. Well, the interesting cases are, for instance, one case where this was really well studied are 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau spaces with toric symmetries. And basically this arrow is mirror symmetry. I will not describe the gauge symmetries, but just say that from a spectral curve you can construct, you can study the moduli space of flat connections in bundles, and basically this is a gauge theory. And somehow the semi-classical limit is the space of Higgs fields, and the spectral curve is the spectral curve of the Higgs field. I don't want to enter the details, but this is really related to Hitchin systems on all that. I will not explain that today, maybe another time. I want to say more about the CFT side. So let me say a little bit more about the CFT side. So sorry, I will erase that instead. Let me erase that instead. So the CFT side, I will start the other way around. Let me start from a CFT. Let me start, for instance, for Liouville. Liouville, so which is an SL2C symmetry on the sphere, Liouville theory on the sphere with four points. Let's call them xi, well, x1, x4, and with charges alpha 1, alpha 4. And let's take the Liouville theory at q equals 0, which means central charge c equals 1. Okay. And in CFT, what you would like to compute are amplitudes. And typically, an amplitude you would like to compute is the product of vertex operators, the alpha I of xi. So that's so you take a product of vertex operators and you want to compute the amplitude. Well, in fact, in CFT, it's good to decompose amplitudes into conformal blocks. So basically, you separate the holomorphic dependence in xi and the anti-holomorphic dependence. I will not enter the details, but there is a procedure somehow to compute those things. And the idea is that this will be the tau function of a certain spectral curve. So I just want to say you what spectral curve we're going to consider. In fact, I'm going to take the limit of very large, so or people call that heavy, the heavy limit, heavy charges. Let me rescale all the charges by a factor epsilon to -1, and we shall consider the limit epsilon going to 0. And so what is the spectral curve that will correspond to that problem? So consider the limit epsilon going to 0 of the stress energy tensor of the classical. So here we are talking about a quantum CFT, but let's take just the classical part. So the stress energy tensor will just be a function of x, and it has the property that it has double poles at the points, so x minus xi to the square, and with coefficient alpha I to the square, plus you have also simple pole terms, and the beta i's must be such that this behave like O of 1 over x4 at infinity. When x goes to infinity, you want it to behave like that, so which puts 3 constraints on the beta i's. So in fact, you don't have really 4 independent beta i's, you have only 1 independent of them, 1 independent beta I. And this choice of, so this independent beta I is somehow parameterizes the conformal blocks. Again, I don't want to enter the details, but basically your spectral curve, so now take the spectral curve, y square equals t of x. This will be your spectral curve. So what I claim is that if you take that as a spectral curve and follow the same procedure, define the tau function, then the tau function is equal to that amplitude. So this is more a conjecture than, I mean, this is a claim. It should be checked in all cases, but I strongly believe this is true in all cases. And just to give you an example of what psi is, psi of epsilon minus 1s on x is just the insertion of a degenerate vertex operator. So you have your 4 vertex operator, times a degenerate operator at x and divided by so the claim is that this is the psi function, this is just the insertion of a degenerate operator. The same procedure can be applied to more or less any, so if you would replace SL2 by SLR, you take the spectral curve, a spectral curve related to the classical limit of WK operators instead of, so the tensor, the stress energy tensor is W2, but if you take the full WKs, you have a spectral curve in general. And so in this way, you can associate a spectral curve to a CFT. And the claim is that this procedure, this tau function, computes the heavy limit of your amplitudes.
Is it true for any Q or just for Q?
No, here this is really Q. Well, in fact, I know how to make it work for arbitrary Q, but it's still in progress, and somehow you have to generalize the notion of spectral curve to do that. You have to introduce some non-commutativity in your spectral curve, and then you can reach any Q, but this is still in progress. It's a little bit like in matrix models. This corresponds to Hermitian case, and if you want to have any Q, you need a non-Hermitian. So that was the general picture. So now let me say what is a spectral curve in details. So the general picture tells you that we have a procedure that the space of spectral curves somehow encodes integrable systems. It encodes some string theories. It encodes some CFTs. It encodes some gauge theories. And there are relationships between all of them. And I find it just beauty. It's a very unifying framework. So now let me describe in more details what I call a spectral curve. So I will really write definition. So I started from many examples, but it's really just an example. In my example, I was considering the set of solutions of an equation P of xy equals 0. These were just examples. So again, you can look at something like that. Sorry. And again, I remind you that it is truly a two-dimensional object. It's hard to draw a picture in 4 dimensions, but you should think of it as a complex curve immersed in C cross C. This is C cross C. So it's really a 4-dimensional space, and you immerse your spectral curve in it. In fact, another way of writing the same ensemble is to choose to write it parametrically. Parametric. So if you write it parametrically, somehow you will write x equals x of z, where z is a parameter, y equals y of z, and z, your parameter, belongs to a certain ensemble sigma, which is a surface. So what this means is that you have a certain surface sigma. It can have a certain genus. Any point on that surface z, you associate to it you have a certain function x of z. So you associate a point there, x of z. You associate a point there, y of z, and such that, sorry. And this is the point of your spectral curve. So you have a map from sigma to your spectral curve by the 2 functions x and y. In fact, so now instead of parametrizing spectral curves by the equation they satisfy, it's more convenient to parameterize spectral curves by a pair of functions on the set to which the parameter belongs. So in fact, a spectral curve will be something like the data of sigma x, y. There is something else. So a spectral curve will in fact be not the data of an equation, but the data of a parameter of a map from a surface into, let's say, C cross C. There will be another ingredient, let me call it B, and I will say later what it is. So my space of spectral curves will be the set of such data, but modulo reparametrization. Because Z was just a dummy variable, so I can change Z to f of Z. Okay. So this is what I will call the space of spectral curves. And here, in fact, so let me say one thing is that the one form y dx is a one form on the spectral curve. It's in fact a one form on sigma. It's a one form that you can define on this surface here. And let me give a name to this. Let me call it eta. And if you know eta, you can recover y just by taking eta divided by dx. Okay. So in fact, in the data of what I call a spectral curve, let me put the one form eta. Eta is a one form. And y is by definition eta over dx. In fact, the advantage of doing that is that now I don't need to assume that x really lives in C. X can now live in an arbitrary Riemann surface if I use this definition, because eta would be well defined. The only thing which is defined only in C is dx, but in other surfaces, eta is well defined, not dx. So y is not really well defined. And somehow eta lives in the cotangent space to the base. That's which for the complex plane, the cotangent space of C is C, so it's fine. Okay, so here eta is a one form on sigma, and B will be a one tensorial one form on sigma cross sigma. What does this mean? This means that locally B is a function on sigma cross sigma, so it's a function of two variables, Z1, Z2. And it's locally it looks like dz1, dz2 times a certain function of z1, z2. If you write in terms of coordinates on your surface, it will look like that. So that's what it means. It's a differential form in both z1 and z2. And it's symmetric. I want it symmetric. Symmetric means that you just want the function f to be symmetric in its two arguments. And I will require something else. I want to have it to have a double pole at z1 equals z2 and no other pole. So it means that when z1 is close to z2, it might be something like z1 minus z2 to the square plus analytic at z1 equals z2. So basically on no other pole. On no other pole. I also want to normalize it such that this coefficient is 1. It's not absolutely necessary. And you can check that this coefficient 1 is independent. If you reparameterize z, if you make a change of variable on z, it will remain the same coefficient 1. So this coefficient is independent. So the spectral curve will be the data of those four things: a surface, a map from sigma to a base, a one form, and a one tensor one form. That's what I will call a spectral curve. And you see B was not in the semi-classical limit.
So there's no B in the CFT?
There is a B in the CFT, and I can tell you, it's related to your choice of channel, S channel, T channel, and so on. You have to, so the B is not unique. There is a choice of B, and it's related to your choice of channel. But the thing is that eventually the full amplitude should be independent of that in the end, and that's related to the Hirata equations. So that's a spectral curve. Let me give an example of spectral curves. And I see that. So let me tell you what spectral curve is related to KdV. For example, so it's one of the simplest. So example KdV. No, sorry. Before that, I just want to say that, okay, so you have the invariance, so the topological recursion invariance. So that to a spectral curve associates a sequence omega gn of S. And omega gn is a n form on sigma to the power n, which means that it's a one form in n variable z1, z2, zn. So it means that locally it behaves like dz1, dz2, dzn times a function of z1, zn, and so on locally. So it's just that. And for n equals 0, it's a scalar. It's just a complex number. So let me, so again, I say this is a black box. I just ask you to believe me. There is a systematic procedure to compute them, and it's not hard at all. But just let me give you the first few of them. Omega 0, 1 of S on Z1 is just eta of Z1. So it was your Y of Z1 times dx of Z1, which you can also say that it was dx over dz evaluated of Z1 times dz1. So just the derivative. So it's just this one form. Omega 02 is B. Let me write the definition of omega 03 of S, Z1, Z2, Z3, just to give you an idea of how it works. It will be the sum over the branch points, so sum over A, such that dx of A equals 0. So you take all the points where the tangent is vertical. So basically it's that one and that one here on that example. They are the 2 points where the tangent is vertical. Take a residue when z goes to A of B of z1, B of z2, B of z3 over dx of z, dy of z. This is the definition in case you really have a y that is a complex function. Otherwise, there is a more general definition that works even if you don't really have a y. But so, you see it's symmetric in Z1, Z2, Z3, because B is a one form in Z1, this is a one form in Z1, it's a one form in Z2 and a one form in Z3. Here you have a kind of dz to the cube at the numerator and the dz to the square at the denominator, so the full thing is like a dz to the power 1, so it's something in which you can integrate, and indeed the residue is an integral. So it just gives a function of, so it gives a one form in Z1, Z2, Z3. You may have seen this formula in papers by Krishever about 20 years ago. So this formula already appeared in Krishever. You may also recognize that this is very closely related to the Rausch variational formula in the theory of Riemann surfaces. So it's an object which has appeared many times in the literature on Riemann surfaces and in integrable systems. It plays an important role, and there are many others, invariants, omega 04, omega 11, and so on. There is a full sequence of invariants, and all of them have a nice geometric interpretation. But let me just say this one. So let me take an example, which is the spectral curve of KdV. Except that I will not use the usual KdV times, but I will just do a small change of variables. So let me just take sigma equals C, and x of z is just z square plus, let's take a constant, let me call it t tilde index minus 1, on y of z is sum of t tilde k z to the k, for k equals 0 to, let's say, d, a certain maximum. Okay, it's hard to read. Okay, sorry. So just take a polynomial of degree d, and just let's take dz1, z2 equals exactly dz1, dz2 over z1 minus z2 to the square. Let's take that spectral curve and it's related to the kdv tau function. The kdv times are not exactly the t tilde k's, but nearly. In fact, the kdv times are the odd t tilde k's multiplied by a factor 2 or something like that. Minus 2 maybe, I don't remember. But it's nearly the kdv times that you have here. And so for it, you could compute omega 01, omega 02, omega 03, omega 510, or whatever, and compute your tau function. And just now, so this is a well-defined spectral curve. You can also somehow eliminate z to find an equation between x and y, and you can find a quadratic equation in y. Y satisfies the quadratic equation. Okay. Just now, let me go into the problem of deformations. So now, let me. So, as Ricardo asked, what happens? So, how do you interpret the deformations, the d over d tilde k's, or how do you change the times really in a way that is intrinsic, that it's purely geometric in terms of spectral curves. So let me represent it in this way. You have your space S of all spectral curves. So let's take you have a certain spectral curve in your space, and you want to deform it into an S tilde, which is somehow an S plus delta S, infinitesimally close to S. What does it mean to deform a spectral curve to an infinitesimally close spectral curve? Well, you see here in this example of KDV, you see you could compute d over d tilde k of x of z, d over d tilde k of y of z, and d over d tilde k of b of z1, z2. Okay, in fact, what is called a small deformation is in fact a tangent vector in this space. So the deformation will be an element of a tangent space at S. A deformation will really be a tangent vector. And here it's a d over d tilde k is such a tangent vector. So you can compute this. Well, it looks easy because here this will just be z to the k, this will be 0, and this will be 0. Except that in fact, so if you want, I can redraw a picture here. We have S is a certain curve, and S tilde, your deformation, is another curve. But you see, it can have nearly no point in common with the first one. So what does it mean to somehow to compute the deformation of x and y if you have, if basically z here belongs to a certain space and here z belongs to another space. So you need to compare them. And one way to compare them is to work at fixed. So basically, or another way to say that is that z is a dummy variable. Why should you compute the derivative at fixed z? It does not make sense. There is no fixed z because you can change z to f of z. So you need to say how you compute the derivatives. And in fact, you are going to compute the derivative at fixed x of z. So by definition, this will be always 0, this one. This one will always be 0, but the other ones might not be 0. So sorry, this one is not 0 if you take t tilde index minus 1. So no, sorry. At fixed x, it's always 0, but okay. So the idea is that if you want to compute the deformation, you don't compare a y of z and a y of z here like that. You compare them only on the same vertical. So you compare them only if they have the same x. So that's the derivative you want to compute. Now if you multiply this by dx of z, so what you already computed is d tilde k of eta of z, okay? And you see that it was, so zk times dx is 2z dz. So you see this is a one form. And this one, if you compute it in general, it will be a 1 tensor 1 form on sigma cross sigma. So what I want to say in the end is that this tangent space is the space of one forms. So knowing a tangent vector, knowing a deformation is equivalent to saying how you deform y on B or how you deform eta on B. So a deformation is the data of the derivative of eta and the derivative of B, and themselves are one forms. So a tangent vector is either a one form or a one tensor one form. On the space of meromorphic one forms, I will call it, so let me give it a name. M1 of sigma is the space of meromorphic one forms on sigma. So the tangent space is basically M1 of sigma plus M1 of sigma tensor M1 of sigma, symmetric. So the tangent space can be identified with the space of one forms. The difficult thing now, if you really want to understand how to deform spectral curves, to follow spectral curves, to move into the space of spectral curves, the difficult thing is that the tangents, so to every spectral curve, you have a certain tangent space. In another spectral curve, there is another tangent space. And somehow you can consider the bundle of, so the tangent bundle, so which is the bundle of all tangent space associated to every point in your space. But this is not a flat bundle. This is a complicated bundle. And you need, if you want to compare a tangent vector here and there, you need a connection. And it's a non-trivial connection. It's related to Gauss-Manning connection. It's a non-trivial connection, and it's hard to compare tangent vectors at different spectral curves. It's not a flat bundle. And also the bundle of meromorphic forms is also not a flat bundle. It's a complicated bundle. What I will use is that I will use form cycle duality. There is something called form cycle duality. And if you use cycles instead of forms, the advantage is that cycles are topological objects. They are rigid, and the space of cycles is a flat bundle. And that's why it makes everything much easier when you speak about cycles instead of forms. So, sorry, there was a question?
No, I was the tangent space at S. I mean, you sigma depends on S. You fix that sigma.
Yes.
That's my question. I don't understand because S contains all the sigma possible.
In fact, I did not enter fully in the details, but here sigma was just a topological surface. And so basically I allow deformations. So indeed, when I did that, I only allow deformations that conserve the topology of sigma. So I was only considering tangent vectors that do conserve the topology of sigma. But the topology is something rigid. You cannot, I mean, really deform the topology. You can change the topology, but you can go continuously
Does
from
this
one
mean
to
that
another.
You allow X of Z vary a little in a way to preserve.
No, it will not change the topology. It will change the complex structure of sigma, but not the topology. So the complex structure of sigma will change, but not the topology. I mean, for infinitesimal deformations. Topology is like integers. It's very rigid. So I see that I'm running out of time. So I don't know if you want to have more details about how now you can represent the tangent space in terms of cycles. So the idea is that all tangent vectors can be represented by cycles on the curve. And so there is a map from cycles to tangent vectors. And the cycles have a natural symplectic structure, which is just intersection. And it gives a symplectic structure on the tangent space, which is in fact the Goldman bracket. But so, and everything written in terms of cycles becomes extremely natural. So I will try to conclude, but if you are interested, I can, in like 15 minutes or so, try to explain really how you map cycles to tangent vectors. But the idea is that now we shall look at our S, and above each spectral curve we will have a space, which is the space of cycles. Or it's in fact generalized cycles. And if you take a cycle in that space of cycles, so gamma, in your spectral curve, it's like so this is typically a cycle, gamma, but I will need to consider also generalized cycles which can have to do with punctures and which can wrap several times around the puncture. In fact, cycles should be thought of as elements of a dual of one forms. Because you can, so if you have a cycle, you can pair it with a one form by just taking the integral, which is a complex number. So it means that a cycle acts on forms by giving a complex number. So a cycle is in fact a one form in the space of forms. So it's an element of the dual. So it means that the cycle belongs to the space of meromorphic forms dual. So that's how you should think of cycles. And the advantage is that the space of cycles is rigid because, for instance, if you slightly deform this curve, you can follow a cycle is just a homotopy class if you want. You can follow it when you do small deformations. So the way of deforming, so when you deform your curve, you know where, so if you go to a next, so this was S, this was S tilde. Sorry, they are really parallel now. So somehow the space of cycles, you know how to do the parallel transport of gamma. You know how to work at fixed gamma. So you really have a trivial connection on the space of cycles. So it's the same gamma. So somehow you can consider the same gamma in S and in S tilde. So that's why you have a trivial connection in the space of cycles. And the space of cycles is really the good space to work with deformations and everything. And you can, so if you have a cycle gamma, so a tangent vector, so you can associate to it a tangent vector, which I will call d gamma. And you can follow, you can integrate the flow of your tangent vector. So it's really now a tangent field. And you can really, so if you had a spectral curve S, you can really define the spectral curve S plus T gamma, which is just another spectral curve where you have followed this flow during time t. And you end up in another spectral curve. And let me give you an example of cycle. So there is, so if you take 2 points A and B here, and takes this path, from A to B, gamma of A to B, then this is something on which you can integrate a form. So this is an element of a dual. This is a generalized cycle. And the idea is that the psi function so let's call it A B is just the tau function of epsilon minus 1s plus you have followed this path so instead of really a function of A and B, now think of it as you have added this path to your spectral curve. And in this way, the Hirota equations on every other equation look very simple, but I'm running out of time, so I will not have time to say it. So just the conclusion of all this is that if you think of Hamiltonians in terms of cycles, everything in the story becomes very topological, and very, very simple. The Poisson structure is the intersection of cycles. The Hirota equations are written just as basically you have now 4 points, A, B, C, D, with and there are 2 possible ways to join outgoing edges to ingoing edges. So either you do that and that, or either you do that and that. And these are the 2 terms in the Hirota equations. And everything becomes very, very simple in this language. And also the Seiberg-Witten or Miwa-Jimbo equations become extremely simple in this language, and also Virasoro equations. If you want, I can show you how to write the Virasoro equations or W algebra equations in this language, but they are extremely simple. The Virasoro operator just inserts certain types of cycles. I mean, it's associated to a certain type of cycles that is very simple. So, thanks for your attention.
So, you were speaking about cycles, the cycles around punctures, but also cycles which are not generate. So, the times you consider, are they times related to any cycle?
Yes,
or,
yes, they are.
So
Yes.
the tau functions I've met are only related with, the times are only related with cycles around the puncture. So you say that you can generalize this
Yes.
to any.
A cycle is basically it's not really any element of a dual, but it's basically anything on which you can integrate a form. I mean, basically it's a one form. A cycle is a one form on the space of forms. So it's something that associates to a form a value. And let me give you some examples with KDV. And it's related to, somehow it's related to punctures, but let's give an example for KDV. Define gamma as the one form which to a form. So to a form, you will associate a residue of z to the k, residue at infinity of z to the k omega of z. Omega of z is a one form. You multiply it by z to the k. Take the residue at infinity. In fact, I like to divide that by k. And it will give a number. So this is a generalized cycle. This generalized cycle, let me call it B infinity k. Okay. Let me define another cycle A infinity k, which to omega associates residue at infinity of z to the minus k omega of z. Okay. So now with k, I like to put k now on in fact, let's put pi No, okay, let's not put 2 pi. Okay, you can check that that the t tilde k is integral of eta over a infinity k. So the times are indeed integrals over the cycles, those generalized cycles. And you can check that if you now integrate over b infinity k, you integrate b of z1, z2, but integrate only the variable z2 on b infinity k. So the result is a one form in the variable z1. The result is a one form in the variable z1, and you can check that it is d eta of z1 over d tilde k. And that's the idea. The idea is that times are somehow integrals of eta over a cycles, and Hamiltonians are related to b cycles in some sense. And the fact that there is a symplectic basis where a and b, you can check. Okay, I didn't say what is the intersection form, but the intersection form is something very simple. But the fact that so here you have t tilde k and here d over d tilde k, so they are coordinates in the phase space. So this is the momentum on the coordinate. It's related to the fact that A and B intersect. Okay.
I was thinking about the torus.
Yes.
No punctures, no
Yeah.
it's just the 2 cycles.
Yeah.
Can you associate?
Yes. Yes.
times
So
to-
exactly. So again, in the example I was citing before, the Liouville theory with 4 points, the spectral curve is topologically a torus.
it has a force in mind.
In fact, it has 8, but yes. It has 4 pairs.
Yes, yes.
So it has 4 pairs of singularities, and but it's topologically a torus. And if you choose an A cycle of your torus, it's equivalent to choosing a channel, let's say the S channel or the T channel or the U channel or
But
something
you
like that.
need the punctures. You cannot.
Yeah, yes, of course you need the punctures. Yes, so you choose you choose a channel on your choice of a cycle. If you take this integral, this is the intermediate charge. So the integral over eta on your a cycle is what's called the intermediate charge on which the conformal block depends. And the corresponding B cycle is the Hamiltonian corresponding to d over d of that charge.
Yes. I mean, you need all the cycles, but your data are associated with the punctures.
Yes.
singularities.
Yes. Well, sometimes, I would say.
And a quick question about CFT.
Yeah.
When you related the stress tensor to the spectral curve,
Yeah.
it's also tempting to consider other integrable quantities in the integrable CFT, like squares of the stress energy tensor. Do they
Yeah.
have any meaning also?
Well,
But otherwise, why the stress tensor? Why did it come up?
okay, I said, so why the stress tensor? In fact, in the formalism, okay, let's say, why the stress energy tensor? In fact, for more general spectral curves and more general CFTs, you need to take into account all the Casimirs of your
That's the point.
yes, of your Lie algebra. On the stress energy, so for SL2, basically the Casimir is the Casimir. There is only one Casimir, which is the Casimir of rank 2, and that's the stress energy tensor. For higher Lie algebras, you have several Casimir, and each of them is associated to a W operator. And the spectral curve, if you want, the spectral curve is the characteristic polynomial. So it contains all the Casimirs.
Can you say that the quantum spectral curve of the people working in the ADS-CFT n equal to 4 or something?
I'd like. I would like very much to investigate that question. I believe that the answer should be yes. But you need to do computations. In fact, what I was claiming is has been so far proved case by case for many cases. We have the intuition that it should be true in general, but there are many cases for which it has not been proved or just even investigated. And indeed, n equals 4 superior means is one of the things we clearly want to investigate. But there are, you need to do some computation. So first, you need to translate your operators into cycles. I'll do that. And if you have a given Hamiltonian and you want to find the associated cycle, the idea is you compute, first you see how it deforms your spectral curve, so how it deforms eta, it gives a one form, and you try to find the cycle which is associated to it by doing intersections, basically. You take a basis of cycles and you intersect your one form with those cycles.
Okay, that's the program.
Okay.